Welcome to the Political Philosophy Podcast. I'm Toby Buckle. In America recently, we've had a string of articles, most notably a couple in the New York Times over the last week, arguing that Democrats are out of touch with median voters, swing voters on cultural issues, and they need to moderate, particularly with respect to trans rights, in order to win them back. A few people have reached out to me about this, actually, both professional writers and just politically informed observers. I guess because I've written a bit about the UK case where our centre left party has substantively conceded on this issue. To sort of ask, essentially, like, I don't want my party to surrender on trans rights, but these people telling us that we have to, they have a lot of charts and figures and data on, like, this is what the median voter wants. How do we respond to this? And I've been back and forth with a few people, and I've tried, insofar as I can, to provide some counter data and counter arguments and counter framing. And so I thought it might be useful to just pull all of that together for a quick editorial episode. This isn't like a sustained analysis one. This is just, these are my thoughts and this is my thinking on, will moderating substantively on trans rights be a winning electoral tack for Democrats? My answer is pretty simple. I don't think it will be. I think LGBT rights are important, and I would urge the Democrats to hold fast to them, even if it wasn't straightforwardly the best political path. But I just think the people pushing this haven't thought about it very much, and they haven't looked to international examples, and I think they don't want to think about it very much. I think they have their starting point and they're happy there. So why not? First of all, before we dive into like political strategy and so on, it is just worth saying that there is a human cost to all of this. I think there can be a perception in the media that quote unquote trans issues, and I put scared quotes around that because this is not something abstract, this is people's lives, are something silly and frivolous and summed up in the sort of joke meme, oh, my pronouns are I'm an attack helicopter. The idea that, like, this is just people being a bit extra and, like, fine, sure, but we're not going to compromise our ability to beat the far right in elections over it. I think that is not the majority view among the Democratic primary electorate. I think it is a view that prevails among a lot of elite commentators. And I just want to start by saying that is not the case. Like, in the UK, where we are, it's complicated, but in the process of implementing a fairly authoritarian bathroom ban, this has real effects for people's dignity, for their physical security, and for their health. Currently in the UK, the case is that really nobody knows what UK law on toilet access is. So if you're trans, do you just have to chance it and take a guess which bathroom in an establishment you're supposed to use? Do you have to out yourself by asking? It seems, and it's also a threat to people physically because laws, this is the one thing conservatives are right on. Laws aren't just consequences, do X and there'll be a fine or a prison sentence or whatever. They're also statements of a society's morality. By criminalising murder and rape, we are putting a deterrent. We're doing several things, right? We're putting a deterrent in place. We're potentially getting dangerous people separated from the rest of society. But we're also making a moral statement. We're saying we believe these behaviours are profoundly wrong, right? And that being in the criminal code is a signal to the rest of society that these behaviours are profoundly wrong. right? And so by legislating, we believe that bathroom usage should be strictly determinative on biological sex. Then you're validating the anti-trans, gender critical talking point that trans women are male predators who are faking it in order to gain access to women's spaces. Now, put aside for a second that there is just no evidence that that is happening at scale. There is no evidence that the trans inclusivity of bathrooms has any relation to bathroom crime. There isn't even really anecdotal evidence of it. Put all that to one side. What you're also saying is we as a society believe this. We are giving it government state sanction. And that signals to everyone else it is okay to behave badly towards trans people. And that is exactly what you've seen in the UK. You have seen just a real rise in harassment and intimidation, not just for trans people, but for people who have a non-conforming gender presentation. So women who dress somewhat masculine or have short hair or whatever the case may be. Um, just anecdotally, a lot of the women I know who have that sort of presentation have said, "My God, you always got a comment or a look every now and again, but it's insane how much that's changed over the past few years, and that is a consequence of the government adding its voice to this." And finally, one of the things bathroom bans do is the de facto consequence is people delay bathroom use. And this is really dangerous. You're not supposed to do that. So we know that bathroom bans tend to produce an increase in problems like kidney problems, UTIs, that sort of thing. Um, so there are societal costs, there's costs to dignity, there's costs to physical security, and there are actual just literal health costs to implementing these sorts of policies. I think because it's the bathroom and like that just kind of like, how many jokes are there about peeing or defecation or so on, right? Like, I think it just goes to the part of our brain where we think it's silly and trivial. But this is a really profound assault on the rights of a small and already vulnerable minority. So I just want to start by sort of putting all that out there. There's other people who can speak far more competently than me to those harms, but that is a brief summary of them. This is not. It's not nothing, right? Okay. So I think what they would say, they being the I call it reactionary centrists, which is a sort of school of political thought that says social liberalism, sort of quote unquote wokeness, has gone too far. It's generated a backlash, and we need to moderate on this in order to win back voters. I think people who espouse that narrative, what they would say is, sure, and I appreciate all that, and look, I don't want to harm trans people, but this is just what the electorate wants, and would you rather surrender on this one issue or lose on every issue, which is what will happen if the far right is elected, which is, obviously what did happen with Trump in 2024. So, I don't think it's wild that we also talk about the strategic front, but I did want to start with, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is real people's lives, you know? Um, to start with, I think there is all sorts of counter data you can present. I want to make some just broad, general points about how this is phrased. So, to start with, it's useful to separate out symbolic from substantive concerns. It's often implied by reactionary centrists that what's being asked of us is we drop off putting social justice jargon, that we stop talking about 72 genders or intersectionality and talk in a straightforward way that ordinary people can understand. That's implied, but once you think about it, what's actually meant, sometimes overtly, sometimes hinted at, is that we curtail the rights of a minority. And look, to be clear, I'm fine with the first. I think what political rhetoric you employ is a pragmatic decision. And it seems, I mean, to be honest, it seems like for quite some time now, at least 5 years, the era of sort of high woke and this sort of highfalutin social justice language is gone, right? And it's whatever comes in its place, it's not going to be that. So, and I don't use it myself. I try to talk in a way that does justice to the complexity of issues, but in the most straightforward and intelligible way. I try not to use jargon if I can avoid it, and if I do, I'll sort of define it as I go. Um, but it's obviously that, because if you think about it, what's actually being asked here is the ask that the Democratic candidate for president does not get up and say, my pronouns are attack helicopter and you're a bigot if you disagree. Okay, I can go along with that. But what Democratic candidate for president has said that? Biden was pro-trans rights. He never backed off this issue. But I do not think the man was anyone's idea of woke. Kamala Harris virtually never talked about it at all in the campaign, unless directly asked. I often find it instructive to ask, when people push this critique, when you're talking about excessive and off-putting social justice language, who is the most powerful person you're thinking of? Because it's not the leadership of the Democratic Party. Like, it's not Chuck Schumer or somebody, And even the left of the Democratic Party, the Bernie Sanders, the Mandamis, and so on, often make a self-conscious decision. They're not anti-woke, but to prioritise economically progressive policies over socially progressive ones in their communication. So this just actually doesn't describe the party. Democrats are, let's be clear about this, Democrats are negatively defined on social issues, with many moderate and swing voters. Like, if you ask a lot of people who are not maybe super politically checked in and filter between the parties, of which there's not that many left, but there are some, they'll say, oh, Democrats are too... They will. You will occasionally hear, oh, yeah, they're just so woke these days. You can't say anything. They believe all this crazy stuff. But I don't think that's anything to do with what actual Democrats are saying. Rather, it's because that's all the Republicans throw out there. This is one of their main things, and the mainline media validate it. Dems could fine-tune their position on trans women in sport or something, and it wouldn't matter a lick. Republicans would keep yelling about it, and reactionary centrists in the press would keep hand-wringing about it. That's not great, but it is also kind of a sunk cost. Now, reactionary centrists would say, okay, but don't validate it. They're not. Democrats are not this image, this stereotypical image of this uber-woke social justice warrior. They're not compromising on the rights of a core constituency, but in terms of, symbolic concessions, those have already been made, and it hasn't mattered. And what you would find if you started to make substantive concessions is that those wouldn't matter too, either. It would keep going. The problem is media imbalance. As long as the right has a huge media megaphone, and let us make no mistake, we are outgunned right now, in both traditional and new media. And as long as the liberal press won't push back on this, public opinion is gonna be dicey. People are hearing from two sides. One which says every vitriolic, unpleasant, and flatly untrue thing about trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people, and the other which says, oh, this is a bit of a problem for Democrats, maybe Democrats need to back down. Those are the two sides people are hearing. So yeah, public opinion's a bit dicey. Public opinion isn't as bad as people say. It really just depends what question you ask, and most people haven't really thought about it at all. But to flip that, maybe, if these concerned centrists really wanted to help Democrats, they could use their considerable media voice to much more loudly and aggressively debunk the lies, the myths, and the dehumanising propaganda of the right, rather than try and force us into a compromised position that will in no way stop the other side's propaganda. I think this is also true on immigration, where unlike trans rights, where I think the median voter doesn't know or care much about it either way, the median voter does care about immigration and their views are often not good for us. But, like, one thing I say to reactionary centrists, I've said this to a few of them now. I got into a back and forth online with someone who was like quite big, and they'd been a government like consultant, and they called themselves a radical centrist, right? Who was really upset with me that I'd quite robustly said, some voters are just racist, and they felt this was really not something one should say, and that I was only going to turn people off. And so I asked them, okay, why don't you show me examples from your work, your writing, or even just a tweet or a post or whatever, of how you make the argument? What do you say to convince people out of hardline nativist views? Show me how you make the case if the way I'm making the case is wrong. And they got really upset with that question. I just wouldn't let it go because I'm a dick. I was just like, they were like, oh, but this, but that. And I was like, okay, but show me a positive case. You don't think the way I'm making the case is right. Show me how you tell people that sort of hardline racism is wrong. And the reason I pressed that is because I knew they'd never done it. I knew that there was no article, no even post, where they'd attempted to talk people out of voting reform, the UK far-right party. And so I just kept going. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm listening. You're telling me that my way's too robust. It's going to put people off. It's going to backfire. Show me your way. Show me how you talk people out of voting reform. And of course, they'd never tried, right? And I think the same is very much true of trans rights. Like, is what you're saying, look, I personally don't want to compromise on trans rights, but we kind of have to because that's where the median voter's at. I always just, okay, where's your argument? You've said how this is a problem for Democrats. Show me where you've opposed the outright false statements the right makes to try and. Now, I guess their point of view is you just can't move public opinion, but I think that's clearly wrong. Abolish ICE has gone from 20% public approval to 50% in a matter of months. You can move public opinion. So, yeah, why not do that? Next point, it's because what people are responding to is media coverage, not reality. What substantively caving will do is piss off your own base. You can ask voters to compromise on a lot of stuff. If you think about the anti-Trump coalition in America, that is a vast, diverse range of different people, and everyone's had to eat some stuff. There are a lot of people on the sort of far left who voted for Biden and really did not want to, right? And there's also people, there's not massive numbers, but they are there, ex-Republicans who broke with their party over Trump and stuff, who kind of just didn't want to vote for a Democrat, period, because they're too left-wing for them, and they did anyway, And then there's anything and everything in between. There's plenty of people who have sort of eclectic views who don't align with the Democratic Party on everything, who nonetheless voted. The Democratic Party has asked its voters to eat a lot. Right, you can ask voters to compromise against the greater evil. I'm not saying, and I think there's a stereotype of people who make my sorts of arguments, that we're just ideological purists who won't compromise on anything. No, look at my track record, my extensive history trying to urge the socialist left to vote in American elections. They're not getting the full-throated. They're getting something egalitarian, but not as much as they wanted. They're getting a party that wants to give more people healthcare, but nowhere near as fast and as radically as they wanted. These are not small things. These are serious issues that they have a moral stake in. And They sucked it up, and people like me told them to suck it up. You know, you can ask voters to swallow a lot when the enemy is fascist. What you can't do is ask people to compromise their basic rights and their ability to exist in society with dignity and on an equal basis. That's just not that's not a realistic thing to ask people to bear. And if you put it to someone like me, like who generally wants to make the case for a united front, like that's just where I believe we have to be. I think there's slightly more of us on the anti-fascist team, but only slightly more, so we all have to stand together. What can I make with a straight face? Can I tell people to vote Democrat with a straight face? I generally find that I can. Could I tell a trans person in the UK with a straight face that they have to vote Labour? I don't think I could. And that's not just sort of personal squeamishness. I will tell people to suck it up when they need to suck it up. But, like, they have been not just betrayed's too mild a word, they are profoundly under attack from the Labour Party, right? And there are limits. And it's not just that you'll lose trans votes, actually, but their families, and I think the LGBT bloc as a whole. In the UK, I couldn't find polling specific to trans people, and maybe it's just too small a minority. I did find some data on how the LGBT vote has changed. In the 2024 election, Labour carried 45% of the LGBT vote, and I think they probably should have done a bit better than that, honestly, because I think already they were sort of signalling that they were moving on this issue. Now, by the middle of last year, that was 20%, so more than halved. And I couldn't find any recent data, but my suspicion would be it's declined significantly since then as well. Anecdotally, everyone I know who's one of those identities is a lost vote to Labour now. Um, like that's one for one. Not all of them voted Labour last time. Most did, and they're all either not, no, or literally like never again. You know, and if you add that all up, that's like a reasonable chunk of people. Like the LGBT vote is one of the sort of pillars, maybe not the main pillar, but it's a significant pillar of what will be the base of any modern centre left party. And they've just lost it en masse for really no intelligible reason. They've not gained any votes on the other side. And I can only expect that would happen to Democrats as well if they moved to doing if they moved to an as extreme an anti-trans position as Labour has, which is national bathroom ban, puberty blocker ban, everything on biological sex and trans exclusionary. I can only imagine the Democratic Party would just blow one of the legs off the chair that it's been sitting on. And I just, there is a bit of a category difference there. And I think that you can ask voters to put up with a lot when the opponent is fascist. You can't ask them to put up with being fed to the wolf, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that the American left use abstention as a threat over the Democratic Party, but we just have to be real that there will be costs. You know? And not just, again, I think the UK case is really instructive here. It's not just directly impacted peoples whose votes you'll jeopardise. It can indirectly harm you in all sorts of other ways. Like, so much of politics, right, is about trust. It's about, do I think when the politician standing up says, this is what I'll fight for, this is what I believe in, do we think they're being sincere? Do we think they understand the concerns of people like us? Do we trust that they'll fight for us, right? I think that's a lot of why, so Starmer right now in the UK, right, should be getting a lot of credit from progressives. He's faced a lot of pressure to join the war in Iran with Trump. And he's kind of talked out of both sides of his mouth, but it appears that they're not, right? And this is what the left wants. He's done it. He should be able to get up and give like a Love Actually speech where he stands up to the Americans and gets a lot of cred from the left. But he's getting none whatsoever. Why not? Because we don't trust him. Trust is massive in politics, in a way that I think the reactionary centrists, the appeasers, don't even remotely understand. Everything to them is just this logical little calculation of people have XYZ policy preferences, and whoever gets the closest to them is gonna be. But no, that's not how it works. Mandami in New York, right, has the trust of the left base. He ran on affordability and bringing prices down. Now, last time I checked, New York is still pretty damn expensive, and I'm going to throw this one out there too. Come 3 years, whatever it is, when he's up for re-election again, New York will still be pretty damn expensive. But I bet you, unless he messes it up somehow, that base will still be with him. Why? Because they trust him. They believe that they believe that, and I think correctly, that he's not a magician. He's not going to be able to fix everything, but he is someone who's genuinely trying to make the lives of ordinary people better. He has that trust, right? In the UK, we had a by-election. I covered it a bit on the last episode where the Green Party won a seat. Again, heavily talking about affordability. Now, as one MP, they are not going to be able to do anything for affordability in that area. Not really. But I suspect they'll probably be elected again next election. Hannah Spencer, her name is. Why? Because I think people believed that this is someone who shares their concerns and will genuinely do what she can for them. People do not believe that about Keir Starmer. And I think even if he got the economy turned round, which there's no real sign of, but even if he did that, I don't know how much credit he will get, because people will always struggle with their finances. People will always feel the pinch. And do you give politicians credit for being on your side in trying to bring that down? Or do you blame them for what will always be a fact that people have financial difficulties? I think people don't trust him. The people he needs, obviously the people on the opposing political team don't trust him or like him, but that's that's to be expected. But the people on his own team don't trust and don't like him. And I think a lot of these social issues stuff feed into that. I think their sort of view is, yes, we'll piss off the hippies on the social issue stuff, but if we turn the economy around, people will credit us. And I think that's a bit naive. I think people won't because they don't trust you. And they don't trust you because you've shown that you're willing to throw people under the bus. I, as a straight, white, cisgendered man, don't trust the Labour Party because of how they've handled core rights issues. And it is not irrational for voters to withdraw trust like that. If you throw one minority under the bus for the sake of expediency, you've just shown that you'll throw any minority under the bus. A stat I always cite is the number of anti-trans articles in the UK press went from 60 a year about a decade ago to 7,500 a year. The media just collectively decided we are going to drive a small and vulnerable minority out of public life. And our centre-left party just caved to it. What if, now, what's to stop them from doing that to anybody else? Now, I will grant you, if the minority, the 0.5% of the country they decided to go after was Oxbridge grads or something, there would probably be a bit more pushback. But what if, I don't know, what if the press just started up fear-mongering about Sikhs, right? Now you might say, well, what have Sikhs ever done to anybody? But what have trans people ever done to anybody? I'm sure you could find reasons. They carry this ceremonial knife around with them. It looks a bit foreign and scary. I have no doubt They could make up some histrionic nonsense to justify demonising them. If we had a sustained decade of every newspaper flipping out, would the Labour government cave and fundamentally curtail their rights? And I think we would have to assume that they would. Would the Democratic Party? Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, yeah, the Democrats are useless centrists. So no, I think the Democratic Party wouldn't. I think you'd have a lot of nervousness, a lot of hand-wringing. I think you'd have a lot of editorials in the New York Times. But if the call was from the press for like restrictions that de facto meant that Sikhs couldn't leave their homes, I don't think the Democratic Party would fold on that. Call me naive, I don't think they would. And that is why I can tell you, being someone who perhaps is hesitant to vote Democrat, why I can tell you to vote for them with a straight face. And why I can't for Labour. But that's also why, whatever good Labour does, they will not be credited for it. Because people, I think, intuit. Maybe they haven't worked through every step of that logic in the way I have, but people intuit that these are that our national leadership do not care about people like them, and that if it came to it, if there was pressure from the right-wing media, they would throw you under the bus in an instant, right? In an age of rising fascism, the groups that oppose it are going to be a motley crew. There's going to be a whole bunch of us, and we're going to drive each other nuts at times, right? There has to be a sort of baseline level of trust that no one gets fed to the wolf, right? Otherwise, how can you fight on that team? How can you fight on a team knowing you might be pushed out the door to the wolves at any minute? You can't, right? Which means just everyone going their own way and doing their own thing, which just collapses the resistance. This is just one I think we can't cave on. And I agree when the right runs ad after ad about it. That's a bit hard to just sit there and take, but the solution to that is to go on the counter-attack and hit them hard with other stuff. I don't think it's possible for the Democratic Party to meaningfully concede on this. It just isn't. The solidarity we have, where people from socialists to progressive liberals to mainline liberals to even the odd anti-Trump conservative are all on the same side and are all increasingly committed to a reform and accountability agenda. We are all operating under one party. That did not just happen. That was fought for and compromised for, and is the result of many wranglings and discussions, some of which were not edifying, but we have arrived at something of a united front, and that was work. I do not feel like gratuitously blowing all that up again, even ignoring the human cost, even if I didn't care at all about the rights and dignity and physical health of trans people, which of course I do, but even discounting that, I do not feel like blowing up the coalition, which is what this would do. And it would gain us nothing. The people who are virulently anti-trans will always have a better option in the Republican Party. You cannot outbid that. You cannot outbid people who are saying increasingly openly genocidal things. And that is not a word that I'm just throwing out there for shock value. A lot of right-wing leaders and pundits have said our goal is elimination, right? So you're never going to get them. The median voter, every bit of evidence in the world is public opinion's dicey. If you say should people be able to transition, or usually people will say yes. On other issues like, say, women's sports, public opinion's usually against us. I kind of don't think it matters. I don't think people really vote on that. And I think what we have to do is convince people that we really are in a struggle of freedom versus fascism, and that our side is the right side. And just imagine this. Say you could convince people of that, then anything to do with trans rights would not matter at all. Surely. Put it this way. If I'm talking to a swing voter and say this would probably be over the course of several conversations, but by showing them what's happening in ICE detention facilities, by showing them the openly genocidal language of our administration, by really demonstrating their racism and their authoritarianism, the sort of direct through lines to 20th century fascism. If I could get this person really convinced that yes, it's fascism, yes, if we keep going down this path, mass graves are next, that their non-white neighbours will be rounded up, that their children will not be safe, even as if I'm just assuming this person is a white person. Even they will not be safe, that we will have a fully authoritarian government that will disappear or kill any person for any reason. If we don't get a handle on this now, that is where we are headed. And it is in all of our interests not to do this. If I can sell this hypothetical swing voter on that, and they're genuinely with me, they believe it in their bones, can you imagine them turning around and then saying, but I've heard about this trans woman on a basketball team. That would just not make sense as a thing for them to say, right? I think what they may say is, assuming this hypothetical white swing voter is a more moderate or conservative type, they might say, okay, well, listen, I don't love everything about the Democrats. I've heard some, weird stuff about gender and gender identity, but, I mean, heck, if they really are fascists, I guess I've got to just put that to one side for right now. In the same way as all sorts of other groups across the coalition have had to put stuff to one side, right? I cannot imagine someone, just like, it just doesn't seem psychologically possible for me, for them to genuinely think that this is fascism, that this is what's on the table, and that this would endanger their families' lives, and then privilege trans inclusion in college sports over that. I just cannot imagine that person. Now, if there are people who are voting based, centrist voters who are voting based on this stuff, it's because they haven't been sold on the first part, right? They think I think there's still a lot of people who are in a mode where the Republicans are sort of still broadly a normal centre-right party, albeit with an unusually sort of shouty and undignified figurehead. I think that's where a lot of people are. But all of which is to say, the fundamental conversation here is this really fascism, and is it really worth opposing? I think there's a chunk of America, not massive necessarily, but they're there, 20% call it, who thinks yes, it's fascism and that is a good thing. We love Trump because he hurts and humiliates the people we hate. I think there's another chunk of America, maybe probably about the same size, maybe 20%, who believe it's fascism and it's dangerous and we hate it and we have to do everything to oppose it. That's, resist libs. It's also, to be fair, a lot of democratic socialists and, the odd anti-Trump centrist. And then I think, there's a good chunk of the country who just aren't political and don't vote and don't pay attention at all. And then there are some in the middle who are still sort of thinking with like an old times mindset, right? Now, is the way to reach those in the middle who haven't been fully activated to a side yet, directly or indirectly? So what I mean by that is the way to reach them to say, these are the real stakes, this is what we think we're fighting for, we believe we are in an existential struggle for the future of free society, not wholly disanalogous. It's the civil rights movement, but the other way, right? And there was recently a study that looked at this empirically and found American democracy is now at its lowest ebb since 1965. So that isn't a facetious comparison. That's what I believe is at stake here. Is the best way of converting people to say what I believe is at stake and say why I honestly believe this is important? Or is the way of converting people to kind of go to issues and try to do this like Frankenstein approach of piecing together what polling shows us that the swing... If I can sell people on why I'm really in it, none of the rest of that stuff will matter. Right? Now, I guess the reactionary centrist, the appeaser, would say, oh, but you're not going to sell people. People are bored of this "we're fighting for democracy" messaging. It just doesn't resonate. It doesn't land. I beg to differ. Over the course of the last 10 years, we have sold more and more and more people. When I wrote the Cassandra's article, right, about the people who first raised the alarm when Trump first ran in 2015, they were a very small minority then. The people who thought this was fascism and the country was in danger, they were there, but that was, I don't know, 1% of America or something. Their numbers have grown. Part of that's events. Part of that is the work ordinary liberals have been putting in the ground. Part of it is there have been, and we're stronger now than we ever were before, those of us who have perhaps some media presence, some sort of platform making this case again and again and again. We've stuck with it and we are selling people. And once we sell people, then we don't have to do this tinkering, right? We can exist as a coalition that is diverse and that is broad church, but it is also fierce and militant because we are united on what we are fighting for, right? We are bringing people over to an aggressive sort of liberalism. It is happening. We have fully sold the Democratic primary electorate. That debate is won now. They think it's fascism and they want to fight, right? So we are selling people on this. It is working. And I guess I would say to people who go, oh, well, maybe you could grab a few more people if you just get on the team, man. Just get on the team. If you want to help beat the fascists and you're concerned about swing voters, make the case to them yourself that the right is lying to them about these issues, that if taken to their logical conclusion, it would massively harm a vulnerable minority, and that this is not the thing for them to be worrying about in any event. That the future of a free society is at stake. Argue that if you want to help Democrats win. Stop armchair generaling it. Just get on the team. Okay, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you'd like to support my work, check out my Patreon, links to that and everything else on the website. Thanks again.